Excuse me, sir, what did you think of the best units for every faction video? Yeah, I didn't hear any complaints. So a couple of weeks ago, you might not have heard, I went through and ranked the best units for every single faction, and it is a video that, to this day, I think it's safe to say is universally loved and agreed with. So, you know, it only made sense to come back now and go through all the worst units in the entire game, and make a video that undoubtedly everyone will agree with once again. So what we're looking for today are units that serve no purpose, real stinkers within the roster. They do nothing, they provide nothing. There is nothing, no reason whatsoever why you would ever choose them over anything else. And obviously this list is for campaign, since that's kind of the whole deal around here. So let's get into the list, but just before we do, fun fact, 0% of viewers of this channel are actually subscribed using this graph that I just made up. So if you'd like to be one of the very few number of people that is subscribed to this channel, then do it. Thanks. Alright, now let's get into this list. First of all, we have the Beastmen, and can it really be anything else other than the Giant? And slight spoilers for the rest of this video, Giants suck across the board, so any faction they are in, yeah, they are pretty much one of the worst, if not the worst unit. Giants have been terrible in Warhammer since the beginning, and pretty much everyone knows it. They were terrible in Warhammer 1, they were terrible in Warhammer 2, and now we're in Warhammer 3, and baby, would you believe it, they're still terrible. The entire problem stems from the name. Giants. They are gigantic. They are literally huge, massive entities. You know what that means? Ranged targets can just be like, oh, can I hit this infantry that I actually have to, you know, aim quite good at and, you know, kind of arc it, get the perfect angle, maybe get on a flank, risk my life, or should I just go for this giant, huge, slow-moving target? Yeah, I'm going to go for that instead. Giants are slow, giants are big, and giants can be taken out by the weakest of ranged troops. They are terrible, never take them, they are nothing better than pincushions. Unless you are going against an army that's literally no ranged whatsoever, then never take a giant. Now we come to Brittany, and Brittany are a faction that I dislike for many reasons, mainly that their entire roster comprises itself of cav, and yeah, he hates Brittany too, you see? It's not just me. It's mainly that the entire roster is comprised of cav units, which are quite difficult to use. You know, micromanagement, I'm not about that. I just like to sit back and do pretty much nothing. But also, the horrifically over-exaggerated French accent every single time you interact with them, that gets quite grating very quickly. No offense to the unironically French people out there, by the way. I have nothing against you or your accent, but you can't tell me that listening to this...
By the light of the lady. Protector of the realm. Honor before glory. Armored in faith. Do you know who I am?
Doesn't get a little bit on your nerves after just a while and isn't possibly the most exaggerated thing you've ever heard. Anywho, for Brittany, you could easily pick any of their front lines because they are pretty bad. They have terrible leadership. They don't have great stats. But as I just mentioned, Brittany focuses on the cav, so melee infantry really isn't the priority. You know, they're bad, but for what they need to do, they do just fine. They stand there, keep the enemy still for a moment so you can charge the shit out of them. However, one unit that doesn't have an excuse is the mounted yeoman archers. Now, the mounted yeomen in themselves are pretty bad. You know, they're really fast and that's all well and good, but, you know, they do no damage, they have terrible armor, they have terrible leadership, they break in an instant, they're not great. But the archers are somehow even worse. They're not just yeomen with bows, in which case they'd probably be, you know, not terrible, but at least passable. But these guys are worse than the regular mounted yeoman, and they have terrible damage, they don't have a lot of range, they don't have a lot of ammo, they don't have a lot of anything. They don't do any damage, and if an enemy gets even close to them, let alone does any damage, they will be off the map in seconds, thanks to their fantastic speed, by the way. They break and then sprint off the map at Mach 95, and you never see them again. Their damage is poor, they're easily scared, and if they get pinned down for more than a second, they will perish instantly. Never use them. Just go for peasants over them, seriously. Now we come to the Demons of Chaos, and just like last week, the Demons of Chaos only have one unit that's actually unique to them, and that's the Chaos Furies. So it's the best unit and it's the worst unit. It's actually not that bad, but you know, we have to put them on this list because they are a faction. So yeah, Chaos Furies. Honestly, the Dark Elves have a pretty strong roster. They've got decent front lines, decent range, decent cav, decent monsters. But there is one unit that sticks out as being particularly terrible, and it is found in the monsters category. That unit is, of course, the Feral Manticore, and it is, for that one word at the start, feral, that this unit is the worst in the roster. It can, and it will, go on a rampage, and if that happens, it will charge headlong into enemy troops like it's trying to get an any percent speed or completion of becoming a piece of taxidermy. There's not much reason to go for it in the roster. If you want flyers, you've got harpies. Yes, they're weaker, but against early game troops, they'll do just fine. If you're against late game troops, you know, got some late game backlines that you really need to take out, and they're a little bit too tough, then send in some cav. You have a good cav roster, and by the time you can get the Manticore, you can get some good cav as well. And then finally, if you want monsters in your front lines, They have way better choices for that. They've got Hydras, they've got the Charybdis, they've got the Medusas. They have way better choices for any of the jobs that the Feral Manticore could do, so why would you ever go for it? As an individual unit, it's actually not that bad. When you compare it to the rest of the roster and slot it into the context of the roster, it's just not good at all. Now we come to the Dwarves, and the Dwarves do have a very, very, very solid roster. They've got great front lines, super tough, possibly the toughest front lines in the game, and they've also got technological superiority in the form of their ranged troops. They've got good ranged infantry, they've got great artillery, and the gyro bombers and the gyrocopters, you know, they're not bad, but they're decent. Rangers, however, just don't make any sense to me. They're essentially worse quarrelers, but they come with vanguard deployment and stalk. But, Big Sexy Colonel, I hear you say, doesn't that mean they can flank? And while yes, you may be correct, why would you ever bother flanking with a unit that has this range? The Quarrelers can sit at the back and do a bit of, you know, that crossfiring where there's one unit here and there's one unit here, and this unit shooting at that unit shooting at that unit, and they can get a decent angle and can get fire off. Why would you ever flank? And the answer is you wouldn't. So Rangers really are very pointless, especially when they're just worse than Quarrelers. So you may as well just go for Quarrelers, use them safer, less risk, more damage. The other range variants like the Bugmans and the Axe Throwers are much better. But the regular Rangers, I just can't recommend you ever put them in your armies. There's just not really a place for them. Come to the Empire now, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anyone. It's the War Wagons. I think these guys might just be the worst unit to ever come out of a paid DLC pack. I've literally just talked about them in the Empire Guide, but basically what you need to know is their missile strength. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's armor piercing. If they are existing in a vacuum, they're alright. You know, they can shoot at things, they can do decent damage against armor. It's all well and good. But they are fat and they are slow. They have large hitboxes. Yes, they have some mass so they can get through some weak units, but anything that's beefier than, say, Marauders, and they're going to get stopped. And due to their large hitbox and their slow speed, they're never going to be able to escape. So they're fat and slow, and when they get stuck in, they can't escape because they're too fat and slow. The worst part is the mortars variants are actually really good. It's regular mortars, but you can move them around a slightly decent speed compared to the actual mortars at least. And also the Hellblaster, the Regiment of Renown, is amazing. It's like a minigun, but the regular War Wagons are just terrible. They don't have enough range to play them safely, and if you stick them on skirmish, if anything reasonably fast gets close to them, like some slow cav, they're going to get taken out in seconds. Never go the War Wagons if you can help it. There's just a pointless unit, and they will die instantly against anything that's even remotely quick. Next, come to Grand Cathay, and for this, I'm going to have to stick with my original decision in my original video that I actually did for the worst units in Warhammer 3, but that was before Immortal Empire, so it doesn't count. It's not a copy video, okay? It's a different video, it's a different content. Anywho, the Cathay roster is actually very solid. You know, they've got decent front lines, they've got good range, they've got good war machines. I like the flying things, they're very cool. The artillery is nice, but there is one unit that once you realise something about it is completely pointless. It is without point. And that unit is, of course, the War Compass. It's fine as a unit, you know, it's got some bound spells, it can, you know, charge decently against very weak units, I suppose, and it, you know, it brings all those buffs to your spellcasters. It's great, but you can get it as a mount for Astromancers. So why would you ever go for a War Compass when you can get the mounted Astromancer, which has all the benefits of the regular War Compass, but also has a full spellbook and more weapon strength and a little bit more leadership? You wouldn't. That's the simple answer, you just wouldn't. Just build yourself the hero capacity and you'll never use these things, and if you do use them, you'll be using them with a caster and we'll get way more done. For the greenskins, it's the Giant again. See the Beastmen section for the rant? Yeah, they're literally statistically identical, so yeah, Giants again. Giants suck, across the board. That one's an easy one, baby, let's move on. Next we have the High Elves, and I actually went with the Ithilmar chariots. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, Colonel, he doesn't like using chariots, so he's just saying that they're bad. And while that is correct, I cannot use chariots to save my life, at least effectively in the heat of a non-slow-mo battle. It's besides the point. Now, there's nothing offensively bad about the Ithilmar chariots, to be honest. You know, statistically, they're a fine unit. But when you go into the campaign and you see where they're unlocked in a building tree, they're unlocked at the exact same tree as the Warline chariots, which are better in, well, all the ways that matter. They have more damage, and that's about it. They have more health as well, I think, and some other things, but it doesn't matter. You unlock a unit that's better, all the things that matter, and it's like the same speed. So why would you ever go for the Ithilmar chariot when you can go for the War Line chariots? You just wouldn't. I mean, obviously, you know, you could say, oh, well, you know, it's because the DLC, and if you don't own the DLC, then they're a fine pick, and they are. But if you own everything, which is what this video is encapsulating, they're worse. You might say they're more expensive, but you're the High Elves. If you get to this point in the game, you don't have 28 quadrillion gold sitting under your big, beautiful feet, then you're doing something wrong. You can almost always afford the more expensive lines, so you should be buying the more expensive lines because they're better and they're unlocked at the exact same time. Now come to Khorne, and again I'm going to be copying from myself in the past here and going for the Chaos Warhounds. Now, I love Warhounds. I've always been a big advocate of them. They're great, they're super fast, they can take out early game ranged infantry, and they can wipe out retreating units like nothing else. I said that pretty much every video. I should really get them t-shirts, basically a catchphrase at this point. But when you're playing as Khorne, there is one unit that can replace them, and you unlock it stupidly early. So you basically never have to recruit Chaos Warhounds, because you just like take one settlement, and just like, okay, time to get these guys on the go, because, you know, I don't need regular Warhounds when I've got these. Now, I'm of course talking about Fleshhounds. They're as fast, and then better in basically every single stat. Yes, they don't have as many entities, but is it really worth having more entities if they're going to be doing a fraction of the damage that these big, beefy, beautiful, bootylicious boys are going to be doing? I don't think so. The Fleshhounds are just better Chaos Warhounds in my opinion, and you should never really use the regular Warhounds because you can get them super duper early. So, you don't need them. They'll do fine super early on or if you haven't got a lot of cash, but honestly, I can never see why you'd go for Warhounds when you have the Fleshhounds. They're just better in every single way. Now we come to Kislev, and this one is very similar to Bretonnia. Because these guys are just so bloody weak, I'm of course talking about the Kosovoite Dervishes. On the damage side, they're fine for an early game cav unit. You know, they have acceptable damage, they have acceptable attack, their charge bonus isn't terrible, but defensively, they are shockingly bad. And yes, I know they shouldn't be taking any damage. If they do, they're in the charge too long. But even in the brief moment from the charge impacting to when they run away and are able to separate from enemies, they take enough damage that it actually matters and starts to cripple their already not very good leadership. Now, it's not as bad as the Omen, they've got like 60, but it isn't huge, and 15 armor isn't going to protect them against anything but the weakest of attacks. So if you're charging zombies, these are the guys for you. Literally anything else, just leave them. If you really want cav in the Kislev roster, just wait a little bit for the Winged Lancers. They're actually good units, and they unlock not even that much later into the tree. Yes, they require like a tier 3 building, but honestly, I would rather just not have the cav and suffer from being a more immobile army than have to use these guys. They are flat out terrible. Dervishes are just money down the drain. Now we come to the Lizardmen. And I was really close to giving this to the Skink cohort, mainly for the reason that Skink Javelins exist. I mean, they're the same unit, but they have Javelins, so why would you ever go for the regular cohort when you can just go for the Javelins? It's, you know, there's no point other than money. But this unit is so bad, it's literally a waste of money. In fact, you should never take them at all, even if you don't have any money, and this is the only thing you can recruit to. I better having no army than these guys. That's possibly an exaggeration, but they're really, really bad. I'm of course talking about the Feral Cold Ones. They're a waste of money, and it's kind of hard to figure out why when you just look at their actual stats, because across the board they're not too bad. They've got great armor, they've got good damage, they've got great speed. Yeah, the melee stats aren't too bad, but you know, they're not as bad as they could be. But then you see it, 55 leadership and rampage. They're going to break in seconds and or go on a rampage, and either one of these isn't exactly useful to the proceedings of the battle. Throw some riders on these guys and they're actually pretty good because they're under control, but in their base feral form, they're totally useless. They will just break, in which case their high speed will catapult them to the edge of the map, or they will go on a rampage, in which case they will suicide into enemies, and then their leadership will break, and then they'll either die trying to get out of enemies, or run away and never come back. Either way, Feral Cold Ones are totally useless. Noska, another giant, they all suck, you get the idea. Now we come to Nurgle, and I'm going to have to go for Rotflies again. I know I'm copying myself in the past, but honestly, they really are the worst unit for Nurgle if you ask me. Now Rotflies, they're honestly not that bad. They have decent speed, they do decent damage, so why are they the worst? And yet again, we have another case of because another unit exists that makes them worthless. Now Plague Drones are basically the same unit, but they have riders, so they're better in all the stats that matter. They are so much better in fact that they render the base unit completely pointless. Yes, they are more expensive and they are unlocked later, but Nurgle has cyclical buildings, so you just kind of build the building and then you get Rotflies, and then like 4 turns later you get Plague Drone. And then you get another Plague Drone, and then you get the ones with Death's Heads, which are even better, and then you get ones with Death's Heads again, which are even better. So why would you ever go for Rotflies unless you can't be arsed waiting for 4 turns? The only time you need to use Plague Drones is if you don't have a full-size settlement that's got this building in it, otherwise there's no point to them. Ogre Kingdoms, giant bad, enough said. Now for the Skaven, and brace yourselves, I'm going to go for the Clan Rats. Yes, hold your gasps. I am quite the trailblazer, so just follow me and I'll tell you why. Yeah, basically everyone knows that Clan Rats suck, and there are so many reasons why. Firstly, there are Clan Rat variations that unlock at the same time or not too long after that are better. For me, my Clan Rats are there to be meat shield to protect my ranged units and my monsters and let them do all the real damage, so they just need to last as long as they possibly can before they run away, which they inevitably will. Regular Clan Rats unlock at the same time as Clan Rat Spears, and Clan Rat Spears might be a little bit more expensive, but they have more defense, so you'd go for them. And then later you unlock shields and shielded spears, and they have more defense, so you just go for them instead. And then you may argue, well, yeah, but those units are more expensive. Well, if cost is what you're worried about, go for Skaven Slaves. You know, they are much worse, but they are super duper cheap. In fact, you can get them for free, I'm pretty sure. So why would you just not go for Skaven slaves if you care about cost? You got Skaven slaves and you got Skaven slave spears. They're both super cheap and, you know, they do the same job, admittedly not as well, but they cost nothing. Basically, there is no reason to ever use basic clan rats, so don't do it. Next up, we have saucy, sexy Slaanesh, and we are going to go for the devoted Marauders of Slaanesh, and this is yet another unit that is way worse simply because other variations exist. Now, the regular Marauders are pretty weak across the board, but what can you expect from a tier 1 infantry unit? You know, you expect them to be weak. They have no armor and not much resistance, so take damage from pretty much everything at a pretty disturbingly rapid rate. Their melee stats are fine, but when they are this weak, they'll take too much damage and break before they get anything done. But again, you don't expect a unit like this to get much done or do much damage because they are so weak. But the main reason that these guys are the worst unit in the Slaanesh roster is because the other variations exist. And again, this is similar to what I was saying with the clan rats. These guys just want to be there to hold units still so that the actual good units in the Slaanesh roster, the chargers, can flank around and tear shit up. So if you want some Marauders, they just want to stand there as long as possible, so they need to last as long as possible, right? Spears have the same defense, but also have charge bonus, so if something charges them, they'll actually, you know, be able to absorb it and then hold the unit in place, and then boom, your unit's moving to charge, you win. Hell Scourgers have expert charge defense and excellent defense, so can last against melee infantry, they can last against cav, they can last against pretty much everything, so why would you ever go for the base unit? They are worse than all the other forms that you have. There's literally just no point to them. Do yourself a favour and ignore these basic Marauders as soon as you can, which won't be very hard, and you'll have a much better time with it. Next comes to the Tomb Kings, and it's good to see that nothing's changed in a lot of years. It's still the Carrion. The Carrion has always been useless, and it will always be useless unless something drastically changes. It's the only flyer on the roster, and it is the worst unit on the roster. You are better off not touching the skies at all as the Tomb Kings than taking this guy. He's so worthless that you may as well just be ground-based. It's better off that way. I don't even need to go into much detail. Just look at that stat card and tell me why they're not terrible. Their damage is mid, their attack is terrible, alongside charge bonus, which might as well not exist, but by far, the worst stat is leadership. 35 is embarrassing, but for a bit of reference, zombies are 40, peasants are 36, and 35 is what Skaven slaves have. And that's what this big, spooky corpse bird creature is working with. It's an absolute hot, stinky garbage. Never recruit it. Next up we have Tzeentch, and again this is another super basic unit, so yeah, you can shoot me if you want, but it's the Marauders of Tzeentch. It's got bad stats and all that usual stuff, but that's not even the main problem here. That just comes down to the other choices that you have at the exact same time. You have spears if you want a really defensive front line, and if you want something that's more offensive, you go with the Blue Horrors because they've got that missile strength that, you know, is surprisingly not too terrible. Why would you ever go for this basic Marauder unit when you have these other units that can do the same job or a different job and do everything better than the regular Marauders can? There's just no point to them. Next up, the Vampire Coast. And this is the unit that's actually good on paper. I'm of course talking about the Depth Guard. They have good armor, they have decent melee stats, they have passable damage, even if it's not the most armor piercing, but it's okay enough. So you may be wondering, why are they on this list? And it's for one very simple reason, and that is the Vampire Count's playstyle. They don't really have a need for melee infantry, since all that they are about is gunpowder, firing. It's basically like playing Empire Total War. You know, you just kind of settle you guys up, shoot the enemies, and then hope that you win. And most of the time, you do before they even get to you, so you don't really need any melee infantry, so why'd you ever get these guys? If they're really expensive melee infantry, if you're going to get any melee infantry, you may as well just get the zombies because they're way worse, and if you're going to get the zombies, you may as well get the zombies that have guns because they can actually shoot the enemies as they're approaching. In another roster, they'd be a fine unit, maybe even a good unit, but for the pirate playstyle, they're just pretty pointless. And now it comes to the Vampire Counts, and yet again, this is another unit that's always been on the worst units in the entire game list, and that likely won't change. It is, of course, the Billy Basic Corpse Cart. It will always be trash, and it's pretty simple to see why. It has variations that are literally the same thing, but better, and have more effects tacked on. The basic form has one aura, and it's not too bad to be honest. In fact, in the late game when you have good units that can make the most of it, I would go as far as to say that this aura is good. But the variations have this aura, and also their own auras that are way better. The Corpse Cart is literally just a static buff machine. It doesn't do anything. It can't fight pretty much anything. It would lose to zombies in enough quantities, but the auras that it provides the value that you get, and this just doesn't provide enough value, especially when you consider the other units that you unlock not even that long after it. Just wait a few turns till you can grab the upgraded variations and you will thank yourself for the extra value that you will get, because you will get nothing from this basic form. The Warriors of Chaos, giant, no, just no. And finally we have the Wood Elves, and the Wood Elves actually have a very solid roster, and choosing the worst unit was actually somewhat of a challenge. Can we also give a shout out to gamer.com, Andre in the Discord was, you know, sourcing some ideas from other lists just so we could discuss them. And they put Hawk Riders, and I just have to applaud them because I don't think I've ever seen a take that is so factually wrong before. No, instead, we went for Dryads, and we're honestly torn between that and the Great Eagle, because, you know, the Great Eagle is not the best, but it could be worse. But Dryads with the actual Wood Elf playstyle, unless you're playing as Dryker or you're playing as Durthu, in which case they're actually really good, just don't really fit all that well. Now the Wood Elf playstyle can either be full skirmish, in which case you have all ranged units, you just hide, stick them on skirmish, fire from where the enemy can't see you, pick them to bits and make them cry from frustration, or you can go for something a bit more normal, you know, have a nice front line, and then ranged units, and then you can send them flanking around because they can fire and fire on the move, and they can move quite fast, and it's all well and good. And if you're doing this, you know, you want a nice tough front line. Then Dryads, they just don't have that, especially compared to a unit that you unlock before them, the Eternal Guard. 25 defense isn't that bad, but from the Eternal Guard, it's a step down. So why would you ever upgrade to a unit that's worse? It's not an upgrade, it's a downgrade. Once you also take into account the leadership taking a hit, and they're just not worth the extra cost. Like I said, if you're playing as one of the Tree Lords, and they are actually pretty good, but other than that, they are pretty worthless. And that wraps up, that is our list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think is the worst unit for every single faction in the roster. Just remember when you're typing out there, by the way, opinions like assholes, okay? Everybody has one, and yours is full of shit. If you enjoyed this video and or found it useful, then consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. You know, we're trying to hit 50k by the end of the year, so that'd be really sweet if you could help me get there. Leave a like if you did, and if you're feeling especially big penis, consider supporting the channel either by becoming a member here on YouTube or a patron on the Patreon. If you do, you get early insights into future content, increased voting power, discounts on merch, and shout-outs at the end of videos like Henry Tucker for his support at the office tier. Thank you to all supporters. One last thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.